which is actually kind of a funny joke. If you never thought Jesus had a sense of humor, you just got to look at this illustration or this joke that he tells. This is kind of his version of a joke. He's like, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in somebody else's eye when you got a huge plank of wood sticking out of your own eye? It's hard to get the sawdust out of somebody else's eye when you got this huge plank of wood in your eye. And he's meaning it to be funny. He's meaning to be funny, like that's just obviously impossible. But when I've read this in the past, I used to think when I read, first take the plank out of your own eye, then you can, see to help somebody else. Like I got to deal with my own problems first, and then once I've dealt with my problems and I'm perfect, now I can help other people. And since I'll never be perfect, I should never help other people. Maybe, I don't know. But that's not what Jesus is talking about. He's not talking about deal with your own issues, fix yourself first, then you can fix everybody else. What he's saying is judgment, as he has just said, don't judge or you'll be judged because the measure you use will be measured to you. Judgment is like a plank in your eye. You can't see anything else because all you see is that judgment. When you make a judgment about someone, you decide that they're a bossy person or they're a lazy person or they're just don't care. Whatever that judgment is that you make about them, you put them in a box, you put them in a category, and now everything you see through the lens of your judgment. Every time I look at them, I see their behavior, and it confirms what I already suspected about them. Oh, see? He's just sitting there. I told you he was lazy. Right? Everything you see now, you see through the lens of your judgment. And so that's how prejudice works. Prejudice is where we basically do that about whole groups of people. Like, oh, I had a bad experience with one person that was black, and so now I think all black people are this way, and so I categorize them, or all women are this way, or like, Mr. Grudinsky over here said, all men are this way, right? So we make judgments about whole groups of people, and that's what we call prejudice, a prejudgment. That's where it comes from. And what Jesus is saying is, look, we got to leave that stuff behind. One of the biggest impediments of relationship is judgments that I make about the people in my life. If I am judging you, if I'm putting you in a box, it makes for a nice, neat category to put you in so I don't actually have to relate to you. I don't actually have to listen to you. I don't actually have to connect to you. We talked last week about how always you are either trying to create a safe connection or keep a safe distance. Judgment is one of the ways we keep a safe distance from people. Because if I judge you as being such and such, then I expect that from you, and then I don't get hurt by you. This is how we use judgment to keep ourselves at a safe distance. But it ruins and undermines connection. As Jesus goes on, he talks about this judgment. He talks about the plank, getting that plank of judgment out of your eye. Then you can see clearly to help your brother. Then you can really help the other people. There's nothing wrong with helping the people. It's just you got to get judgment out of your eye to do it. You got to see them for who they are and be open to them and to hearing from them what they need. In fact, that's what this next part says. I used to, when I read it, and it says right after the part about not judging people, it says, don't give dogs what is sacred or throw your pearls to pigs. And I thought, okay, wait a minute. You're saying not to judge people, but then I got to figure out which people are dogs and which people are pigs? Like those sound like judgments. But again, Jesus is not saying that. What he's using is another illustration. He's saying the same thing from another vantage point. He's saying, look, if you give sacred things to dogs, you give your dog communion, right? You go home and you got this sacred communion and you're like trying to serve your dog communion. The dog doesn't understand it. Dogs don't not want your bread and wine, and he's just gonna like get frustrated. If you take your best jewelry and you give it to a pig, the pig wants food, and the pig can't eat the jewelry, and so he's gonna turn on you because you're at least edible, right? So the idea here is don't try to force things on people. Don't try to force your pearls of wisdom or your great advice or your sacred things on somebody else. That's part of what happens when we judge them. Then we also try to, push our agenda on them. And what Jesus is saying here is don't push your agenda on people. How many of you like it when people give you unsolicited advice? Anybody like it when somebody just comes up to you and gives you some unsolicited advice about what you ought to do with your life or how you can be better? No, none of us like that. And Jesus is saying the same thing. He's like, look, give up trying to manipulate people, judge people, and give them your unsolicited advice. So how, you might ask, do I actually get people to do what I want? Well, that's a good question, because we talked about it last week, and we said that you can't control other people, right? You can control yourself. You can't control other people's flatulence, but you can control where you put your nose, remember? Okay, we talked about that. And we can't control other people. But we have to, in relationship, be able to communicate in ways where we get other people to meet our needs, where we ask other people to do things. And what's the way that we get people to do what we want? Well, Jesus says, you simply ask. He says here, ask and it'll be given to you. Seek and you'll find. Knock and the door will be open to you. For whoever asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to him who knocks the door will be open. Now, most of the time, we teach this passage in the context of prayer, and it's true about prayer. Jesus ties it to prayer in the next part of the passage. But it's true about prayer only for one reason, because prayer is the context of relationship, and it's true about relationships. You tend to get things when you ask for them. Rather than forcing them on people, rather than putting your judgments on people, rather than manipulating people, when you just ask, you tend to receive. This is the way it works. And this is what Jesus is telling us to do here, to ask. He says this is the way it is with God. You don't have to try to manipulate God. You don't have to tell God what to do. He doesn't need your good advice about how he should run the universe, right? It's not that. It's just asking for what you need out of a relationship, and God loves you like he loves a child, and you would want to give good gifts to your children and meet those needs.